The sound of the tow truck backing up was the first crack. A low, mechanical groan outside the office window, alien and disruptive on this quiet Tuesday morning. I didn't look up at first. Just another delivery, another service call. But then I heard the hydraulic hiss, the clank of metal on metal, and something in the pit of my stomach tightened. It was the same tightening I'd felt days ago, the one that had started small and grown into a cold, dense stone, crushing my chest. I pushed away from my desk, my chair scraping on the linoleum floor, a sound that suddenly felt deafening in the sudden silence of my own head. My feet carried me to the window, as if on autopilot. And there it was, the car. Low, impossibly sleek, a ridiculous splash of vibrant red against the drab office park gray. It looked as out of place here as it did in our suburban driveway. And standing next to it, hands shoved deep in his pockets, jaw slack, eyes wide and vacant, was Mark, my husband, the man who had stolen every last dime of our daughter's college fund to buy that monument to his pathetic midlife crisis and his even more pathetic affair. A man in a uniform was talking to Mark, gesturing towards a car with a clipboard. Mark wasn't hearing him. He wasn't hearing anything. He was just staring at the car, at the winch pulling it slowly onto the truck bed, the sunlight glinting off the perfect, unforgiving paintwork. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was just frozen, like the world had stopped spinning and left him stranded on a rapidly shrinking iceberg. And watching him, from the sterile, safe distance of my office window, I felt a breath leave my lungs that I hadn't realized I'd been holding for weeks. It wasn't relief. Not exactly. It was colder, sharper, a pure, crystalline shard of something that felt dangerously close to triumph. The stone in my chest didn't vanish, but it shifted, making room for something else. Something hard and bright. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Before the red car, before the empty bank account, before the cold, hard edge settled permanently in my chest, life was normal. We had a rhythm. Mark left for work at 7:15 a.m., kissed me goodbye if I was awake, sometimes not. I was already at my small accounting job by 8. Sophie, our daughter, was the center of everything. Her school schedule dictated ours. Her dreams were our dreams. We weren't rich, not by a long shot, but we were stable, comfortable enough. We owned our little house in the suburbs, 2 cars, practical, boring sedans, and we had a plan. The plan had a name, Sophie's future. It was mostly funded by the 529 college savings account. We'd started it when she was just a baby, little by little at first, then more aggressively as she got older. Every bonus Mark got, every tax refund, every spare dollar that didn't go towards bills or Sophie's braces went into that account. It was sacred. It represented years of packed lunches instead of eating out, delayed home repairs, skipped vacations. It was the culmination of our shared sacrifice, the promise of opportunity for the girl we both adored. Sophie was a senior now, buzzing with nervous energy, poring over college brochures, writing application essays late into the night. Mark seemed proud. He'd sit with her sometimes, reading over a draft, offering vague encouragement. He'd talk about visiting campuses, about the freedom she'd have, the opportunities waiting for her. It felt good. Like we had done this right. We had given her the launching pad. Looking back, maybe there were signs. Mark had become restless. He'd started working out more, buying clothes he wouldn't have worn a year ago, tighter shirts, trendy sneakers. He was on his phone constantly, always just out of my line of sight. Late nights at work became more frequent, accompanied by flimsy excuses. He'd snap at me over small things, then swing back to overly cheerful, like trying to cover his tracks with a cheap rug. I dismissed it as stress, maybe a touch of the dreaded male menopause. We were approaching 20 years of marriage. Maybe things just got a little stale. You wrote it out. You focused on the kid, on the plan. The plan was solid. Sophie had her top 3 schools picked out. The application fees were paid. The acceptance letters had started to trickle in. It was real. The clock was ticking towards tuition payments, housing deposits. The 529 balance was a comfortable, reassuring number. It represented 15 years of careful saving. It was untouchable. Or so I thought. The email arrived on a Thursday morning, buried deep in my personal inbox. An automated notification from the 529 plan administrator. Subject line: large withdrawal notification. My heart did a little flutter of confusion. Had I missed something? A scheduled payment? No, that wasn't right. Tuition payments weren't due for months. I clicked it open. My eyes scanned the details. Withdrawal amount: $185,000. Recipient: account holder, Mark, technically, since he'd set it up originally, though we both contributed. Reason: not specified. Date: 3 days ago. $185,000. Gone. My breath caught. My hands started to shake. This had to be a mistake. A glitch. I logged into the 529 portal. The balance stared back at me. A fraction of what it should have been. A devastating, impossible number. It wasn't a mistake. The money was gone. Every penny we had saved for Sophie's future, wiped out in a single transaction. My mind raced. Mark? Why? Did he get scammed? Was there some family emergency I didn't know about? I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried his office line. Voicemail. Panic clawed its way up my throat. I stood up, pacing the small office, ignoring the curious glances from my colleagues. Where was he? What had he done? I drove home on autopilot, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The house was empty. His car wasn't in the driveway. I walked through the silent rooms, the weight of the missing money pressing down on me, making the air thick and hard to breathe. And then I saw it, parked at the curb, gleaming under the afternoon sun, a splash of audacious, offensive red. A sports car. Low-slung, impossibly sleek, utterly impractical. I didn't recognize it. I didn't recognize it as our car. Because it wasn't. Not the boring sedan. Not the sensible SUV. This was something else entirely. The air went still. The buzzing in my ears sharpened. The car. The missing money. It clicked. A cold, horrifying, undeniable connection. He came home an hour later, whistling, a swagger in his step I hadn't seen in years. He looked happy, elated even, like a teenager who'd just gotten the keys to his first car. He didn't notice the red car outside at first. Or maybe he did, and just expected me to be thrilled. "Hey, honey, you're home early," he said, dropping his briefcase by the door. He smelled faintly of expensive cologne, and something else. Something floral. I couldn't speak. I just pointed towards the window, towards the curb. "Mark, what is that?" My voice was flat, dead. He followed my gaze, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Oh, that. Yeah, pretty sweet, right? Just picked her up today." Impulsive, maybe, but he trailed off, waiting for my reaction. "Where did the money come from, Mark?" My voice was barely a whisper. His smile faltered. His eyes shifted. "Money? What money?" "The money from the 529 account. $185,000. It's gone." "Is that? Did you buy that car with Sophie's college fund?" The words felt grotesque, coming out of my mouth. I couldn't believe I was saying them. Couldn't believe this was happening. His face hardened instantly. The playful air vanished. "Don't be ridiculous," he said, his voice low and sharp. "I borrowed it. Just for a bit. I'll put it back. It's an investment." "An investment? Mark, it's a sports car. And borrowed? It's Sophie's college money. It's all of it. Every penny we saved for 15 years. The whisper was gone. My voice rose, trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. "Keep your voice down," he hissed, glancing nervously at the closed front door as if Sophie might appear out of thin air. "It's fine. I have things in the works. This car. It's for business. It's about perception. You wouldn't understand." "Perception?" Sophie can't pay for tuition with your perception. What thing's in the works? What business needs a ridiculous red sports car? My hands clenched into fists. And who is it for, Mark? Is it for you? Or is it for someone else? His eyes narrowed. What are you talking about?
Don't lie to me, Mark. Not now.
Who is she? The floral scent hit me again, stronger this time. He sighed, a performance of weary exasperation. There's no she. You're being paranoid. I bought a car. I used some funds. I'll replace them. End of story. End of story. Our daughter's future is the story, Mark. You stole her future. You stole our sacrifice. And you bought this. I gestured wildly towards the window. Tears streamed down my face now, hot and stinging, tears of betrayal. Not just financial, but a deeper, colder kind. He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my gaze. I needed this, he mumbled. Things have been hard. I deserve something. Deserve? You deserve to explain yourself, Mark. You deserve to figure out how you're going to put $185,000 back into that account before Sophie needs it. Before you shatter her dreams. The confrontation devolved into a raw, ugly mess of accusations, denials, and his infuriating gaslighting. He spun theories about recouping the money quickly, about how this was all part of a bigger plan I was too small-minded to grasp. He painted me as hysterical, unsupportive, and ungrateful. He never once expressed remorse for taking Sophie's money. His only regret seemed to be that I had found out. By the time he stormed out, presumably to take his new investment for a spin, leaving me sobbing on the floor, the truth had settled like a layer of toxic dust. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had made a choice. A deliberate, selfish, devastating choice that prioritized his own fleeting desire over his daughter's future and his wife's trust. He had stolen from his own family. The days that followed were a blur of quiet desperation and frantic damage control. How could I tell Sophie? Her excitement about college was palpable. She was checking her financial aid portals daily, calculating potential costs. I couldn't crush her like that.
Not yet.
I started looking into emergency student loans, grants, scholarships I might have missed. The numbers were grim. Loans would put a huge burden on Sophie, something we had desperately wanted to avoid. Scholarships were competitive, not guaranteed. Every option felt like a band-aid on a gaping wound. Meanwhile, Mark acted as if nothing had happened. He'd come home late, smelling of that same expensive cologne and that faint floral scent. He'd hum in the kitchen, talk about his day, completely ignoring the chasm that had opened between us. He never mentioned the money, never mentioned putting it back. When I tried to bring it up, he'd shut down, get angry, or leave. The red car became a fixture in the driveway, a constant, gleaming reminder of his betrayal. I started doing my own digging. Where was he going?
Who was he seeing?
The phone bills told a story of frequent calls and texts to a number I didn't recognize. A reverse lookup gave me a name, Sarah Jenkins. A search on social media brought up photos. Younger.
Blonde.
Often pictured in expensive restaurants. And sometimes, recently, posing next to a very familiar-looking red sports car. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. He hadn't just bought the car. He had bought it for her. With Sophie's money. The anger turned cold. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the calculated cruelty, the sheer audacity of using our daughter's future to fund his pathetic affair and buy his mistress a toy. He hadn't just broken my heart. He had shattered my reality. I stopped confronting him. The arguments were pointless, soul-crushing. He was a brick wall of denial and self-pity. Instead, I went quiet. I watched. I listened. I learned everything I could about Sarah Jenkins. Where she worked, where she lived, her social media presence. I learned about the car, the make, the model, the year. I subtly probed Mark about the financing, about how the purchase was structured. He was annoyingly smug about it, hinting at some complex arrangement he'd pulled off. Leverage, he'd called it with a wink. Smart financing, he was proud of his maneuver. He saw himself as a financial wizard, not a thief. The more I learned, the more a new feeling began to emerge, pushing aside the despair. It was a cold, quiet resolve. Mark had stolen Sophie's future. He had tried to steal mine, too, by leaving me to pick up the pieces. He had underestimated me. He thought I would just cry, maybe eventually forgive him, and work myself to the bone to fix his mess. He was wrong. The realization was a pivot point. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the architect. He had shown me his cards, his selfishness, his weakness, his arrogant belief in his own untouchable cleverness. He had bought a car with stolen money for a woman who likely saw him as a temporary source of luxury. He had created a situation rife with vulnerabilities. My job was to find them and exploit them. Not just to get the money back, but to dismantle the illusion he had built and ensure there were consequences that truly mattered to him. I reached out to a lawyer friend, carefully framing the situation hypothetically at first. If someone took money from a joint account, say, a child's college fund, and used it for something frivolous, what recourse would the other parent have? She gave me the standard answers: civil suit, potential claims in a divorce. But she also mentioned complications, especially with 529 plans, and how assets purchased with potentially disputed funds could be viewed. It was complex. It didn't feel fast enough. Sophie needed the money soon. The red car sat in the driveway, a scarlet letter for my husband's infidelity and theft. Every time I saw it, the coldness in my gut intensified. It wasn't just a car, it was a physical manifestation of the injustice. It wasn't just sitting there, it was mocking me. It was mocking Sophie. Mark seemed to grow bolder. He was out more evenings, sometimes not coming home at all, citing business trips that felt less and less plausible. He was spending money freely, evidenced by bank statements I discreetly accessed, expensive dinners, gifts, weekends away. All while Sophie worried about college costs, and I scrambled to figure out how to fill the $185,000 hole he had blown in her future. The pressure was immense. Sophie started getting reminder emails from colleges about housing deposits and orientation fees. "Mom," she'd ask, her brow furrowed, "do we have enough saved for everything? What about books and living expenses?" I'd smile, hug her, tell her not to worry, that we had it covered. The lie tasted like ash. I spent hours late at night after Sophie was asleep, hunched over my laptop. I researched the car financing. This was Mark's area, not mine, but I learned fast. Liens, titles, loan structures. I cross-referenced information from his emails, stray documents I found, even details from Sarah's social media posts that she carelessly shared. The red car wasn't paid for in cash, of course. Mark wasn't that stupid, or perhaps he just didn't have that much cash readily available, even after draining the 529. He had financed a significant portion of it. The twist he was so proud of, his smart financing, turned out to be complicated. He had used some of the 529 money as a large down payment, structuring the loan in a way that seemed, to him, advantageous. He had boasted about the low monthly payments. But there was a crucial detail that Sarah Jenkins's careless online life had inadvertently revealed. She hadn't just received a gift, she was somehow tied to the financing. Not as a cosigner, which would have been too obvious, but something else. Something Mark had orchestrated to perhaps keep his name cleaner on the loan while still ensuring the car was hers and registered to her address. I found it buried in a financing document I managed to locate among Mark's papers, a quiet clause, an assumption of responsibility, a detail about the registered address and primary driver. It was a convoluted mess, designed to look clever, but ultimately, it created a single, critical point of failure. The loan was tied to Sarah, tied to the car, tied to the initial funding source, the large down payment. It was a house of cards built on Sophie's stolen future. And I saw exactly where to blow. My decision solidified. It wasn't about revenge. That felt too emotional, too messy. This was about surgical extraction. About applying pressure precisely where his elaborate, deceitful structure was weakest. He had weaponized Sophie's future against me. I would weaponize his perceived cleverness against him. The plot twist I needed had to be swift and undeniable. It needed to connect his theft, the car, and his mistress in a way that blindsided him entirely. It couldn't be slow legal proceedings or hoping for karma. It had to be a direct consequence of his actions, orchestrated by me. The crucial piece of information was the source of the down payment. Financial institutions have rules, regulations. Funds from certain types of accounts, especially those designated for specific purposes like education, aren't supposed to be used for, well, for buying sports cars for mistresses. And there were regulations about how those funds were transferred and documented. Mark, in his arrogance, had left a trail. A paper trail connecting the large withdrawal from the 529 directly to the down payment on the car loan. He thought he was being clever by routing it through an intermediary account, but he hadn't been careful enough. I gathered everything. Bank statements, the 529 withdrawal confirmation, snippets from Sarah's social media showing the car at her address, the financing document with the clause I'd found. It was a small, neat stack of paper, but it felt heavier than lead. I didn't go to the police. That felt too unpredictable, too public initially, and might complicate getting Sophie's money back quickly. I didn't go to a divorce lawyer yet. I wanted to strike first, decisively. I went directly to the financing company that held the loan on the red car. I requested a meeting, stating I had information regarding one of their financed assets that might be problematic. I was calm, measured, presenting myself not as a jilted wife seeking revenge, but as a concerned party with evidence of potential financial malfeasance involving funds that had a clear, designated purpose. I didn't mention Sarah Jenkins by name unless they brought it up, focusing solely on the source of the down payment and the discrepancies in how the asset was being used relative to the loan agreement terms I'd uncovered. I laid out the documents, explained the origin of the funds, a dedicated education savings account, showed the large withdrawal, showed the transfer route, sloppy enough for them to trace, showed how that money aligned precisely with the large down payment on that specific red sports car, financed through their institution. I highlighted the clause about the primary driver/registered address being different from the loan signatory, Mark, and showed evidence, the social media photos, utility bills addressed to Sarah at that location, that the car was primarily located and used elsewhere. Their interest was piqued. Financial institutions don't like messy money, especially when it involves funds that might have a protected status or could be linked to later legal disputes. They saw the potential for complications, for legal entanglement, for the loan becoming tainted. They looked at the paper trail Mark had left, the very one he was so proud of creating, and saw a liability. They saw a loan underwritten partly with funds clearly earmarked for a child's education, now used to purchase a depreciating asset for a third party. It was a regulatory headache waiting to happen. They asked questions.
Lots of them.
I answered factually, calmly, providing dates, amounts, account numbers. I showed them the empty 529 balance. I told them Sophie was applying to colleges, that tuition payments were due soon, and that the funds intended for her education were irrevocably gone, used to purchase the asset they had financed. I didn't plead. I didn't cry. I just presented the facts. The financing company's priority was protecting their asset and their financial interests. A loan based on potentially stolen or misused funds, tied up in a messy personal situation involving a mistress and a stolen college fund? That was high risk. Repossession clauses are standard. Loans can be called if the underlying information is found to be fraudulent or if the asset is being used in violation of the terms, like being primarily driven by someone other than the borrower, especially if that complicates their ability to recover the asset. Mark's smart financing had made it easy for me to show them exactly that. They didn't promise anything, but I saw the wheels turning. The legal team would review. The asset recovery department would be notified. It was standard procedure when a loan was flagged for this level of risk. I left the meeting feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and quiet power. I had done it. I had pulled the thread. The speed at which the consequences would unravel wasn't entirely in my hands, but I had set the mechanism in motion. The wait was agonizing. Every day felt like a week. Sophie got another college acceptance letter. She was ecstatic. The weight of the secret felt heavier than ever. Mark continued his charade, oblivious. The red car sat there. And then, that Tuesday morning, the tow truck arrived. I stayed by the window, watching the scene unfold below. The tow truck driver was professional, calm. Mark was anything but. He was arguing now, yelling, waving his arms. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read his body language. Disbelief, outrage, frantic pleading. He kept pointing at the car, at the driver, at the house, as if trying to explain this was all a terrible mistake. And then he froze. It was the exact moment he must have realized. Realized that this wasn't a mistake. Realized that someone had done this. Realized that the paper trail he thought was so clever had led the wolves to his door. Realized that the funds he had stolen had come back to bite him, hard and fast. He turned his head slowly, scanning the windows of the office building. His eyes seemed to lock onto my window, 3 floors up. He couldn't possibly see me through the tinted glass, couldn't know I was standing there, watching. But he must have felt it. Felt the unseen hand that had orchestrated his sudden, public humiliation. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. The shock was replaced by a dawning, furious understanding. He knew, or at least he suspected. He knew I was the only one who knew about the 529, about the money, and who had a reason to see that car gone. He stood there, rooted to the spot, as the red car was fully secured onto the truck bed. The symbol of his betrayal, his midlife crisis, his affair, his arrogant theft, was being driven away. Gone in minutes, just like the money had been gone from the 529 account. The tow truck pulled away. Mark was left standing alone on the curb, his hands still shoved deep in his pockets, the picture of a man utterly blindsided. The victory wasn't just the car being repossessed. That was merely the physical manifestation of a deeper win. The win was exposing his deceit, using his own actions to unravel him, and reclaiming a sense of power and justice. He thought he was untouchable, that his cleverness protected him. I showed him the cracks he'd left. The fallout was swift and brutal. Mark came home later that day, a storm cloud of fury and disbelief. "You," he snarled, pointing a shaking finger at me the moment he walked through the door. "You did this." I met his gaze calmly. The coldness had returned, sharper than before. "You stole Sophie's college fund, Mark. You bought a car for your mistress with it. What did you expect?" "I expected you to be upset, maybe cry." Not do this." He paced the living room, running his hands through his hair. "How? How did you even do it?" I didn't explain the specifics of the financing loophole or contacting the company. He didn't deserve to know how I had outmaneuvered him. "You left a trail, Mark," I said simply. "The money was for Sophie. You used it for something it wasn't meant for. Institutions don't like that. Especially when someone points it out." He stopped pacing, staring at me. You alerted them?" His voice was low, incredulous. "You risked everything, just for revenge?" "It wasn't revenge, Mark," I said, my voice steady. "It was justice. It was protecting what you tried to destroy, Sophie's future." His face contorted. "Sarah. She's furious. They just showed up. She had no warning. This is going to ruin everything." "Your choices ruined everything, Mark," I said, feeling utterly detached. The pain of the betrayal was still there, a dull ache beneath the cold satisfaction, but his distress didn't touch me. Not mine. My choice was to clean up your mess. The marriage was over, of course. There was no coming back from this level of betrayal, compounded by his utter lack of remorse for hurting Sophie. The repossession of the car was just the first domino. The financing company's investigation into the source of the funds for the down payment led to questions about other aspects of Mark's finances. His smart financing unraveled further, exposing not just the misuse of the 529 funds, but other questionable financial maneuvers he'd been making. During the divorce proceedings, my lawyer, the friend I'd cautiously consulted, now fully informed and a formidable ally, used the paper trail I had uncovered as leverage. Mark's attempts to hide assets or minimize his obligations were undermined by the evidence of his previous deceit regarding the 529 and the car. The fact that he had effectively committed financial fraud, using legally earmarked funds for personal gain, meant he had very little ground to stand on. He lost more than just the car. The divorce settlement reflected his financial misconduct. While the 529 funds themselves were difficult to claw back directly after being withdrawn, the court ordered a disproportionate division of our remaining assets, combined with significant alimony payments, to compensate for the loss and ensure Sophie's education was fully funded. My winning bigger wasn't about accumulating wealth, but about securing Sophie's future and ensuring Mark faced concrete, financial consequences far exceeding the cost of the car itself. He had to sell other assets, rearrange his entire financial life, all because he thought he was clever enough to steal from his daughter and get away with it. Explaining it to Sophie was the hardest part. I told her, gently, that there had been financial difficulties, that her college fund hadn't been handled properly, but that it was fixed now, that she would go to college, that everything was secured. I didn't give her all the details about Mark's affair or the extent of his betrayal. That burden wasn't hers to carry. She saw that the red car was gone and didn't ask about it. She saw my relief, the way I could finally look her in the eye when we talked about move-in dates and dorm life. Sophie went off to college.
She thrived.
Sending her off, watching her step into the future we had worked so hard for, was the real victory. The empty space in the driveway where the red car used to sit became just an empty space, a reminder of a chapter closed. Mark is still Mark. Blaming me, blaming Sarah, blaming the financing company, blaming the world. He never truly understood what he had lost. Not just money or a mistress or a car. He lost his family, his integrity, and any claim to being a decent man. He thought he was playing a game of financial chess. He didn't realize I was playing a different game entirely, one where the pieces were loyalty, trust, and a mother's unwavering protection. The coldness isn't entirely gone. It's tempered now with a quiet strength, a knowledge of what I am capable of when pushed. The scar is there, a reminder of the pain of betrayal, but also of the resilience found in the aftermath. The red car was just a symbol. Getting rid of it was necessary, but the true cleanup was rebuilding a life based on truth and integrity, ensuring Sophie's future was built on a foundation Mark couldn't shatter. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.